You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Oh man. The thing about recording these like rogue little intros so we try to get something organic is that Hayden likes to say bad words.
Well, you set me up with the one before.
I'm sure. All right, welcome back, everybody. It's episode 56 of Arsenal Pass. Today we're doing a mailbag. According to my memory, I think the last time we did a mailbag was quite recent, but Hayden says it's been a while. So
episode 33.
Episode 33. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I'm wrong. Mailbags. Yeah, some of my favorite episodes. Sort of questions from viewers and listeners, I guess, where we just kind of dive in, go deep on some of this, current topics of Flesh and Blood, as well as just general concepts. These are my favorite episodes by far. I'm excited to dig into this one.
Why are they your favorite? Is it because we get into a little couples argument?
Is it because we get into a couple's argument or because we don't have to write that many notes? I don't know. It's going to be close on that.
Yeah. You mean I don't have to write that many notes?
What do you mean, dude? Oh my God. Don't sandbag me like that. That's just false. All right, Hayden, let's talk about our weeks in Flesh and Blood. Obviously, mine has been interesting. Outside of Flesh and Blood, I was struck by lightning. And I'm okay, but there was a bit of a change in my appearance, so I'm ready to go. I'm fully recovered. Been testing a lot for this Pro Tour these past couple days, and it's been interesting. Not what I expected. I expected to find a bit more diversity, and I think, the format's playing out kind of how I thought it might, but less innovation and less sort of rogue decks creeping up through our testing process. What about you, Hayden?
Yeah, I mean, likewise, I think I was just going to say, I get a little bit shortchanged. I can't even see Brennan's here. I won't see it until I look back and watch the episode because I can't see Brennan's camera. But yeah, I saw it briefly when we jumped on. Yeah, I mean, been testing this week, definitely. That's been what this is about. Pro Tours coming up in a week's time. I leave in less than a week now. In just 5 days, I leave. So trying to get in what testing I can. It's been unfortunately really difficult with work and things as well. But in terms of like findings, yeah, really similar. I mean, the banning is definitely impacting in terms of the fact that you've got Skalata banned. I actually think Skalata is the biggest ban. Like when you all things said and done, and we look back at the Pro Tour, I think we're going to say, wow, like Skalata was definitely the most impactful ban here because Star of the Show is still a really strong contender heading into the Pro Tour. And I know I listened back to the Twitter Spaces that you did with Tarek and Cal McCreath. You had on, the Guardian guy himself talking about Guardian in this format, and Kale said something really interesting about Awakening being banned, making Star of the Show like more aggressive and more explosive. And I thought that's such a weird thing to say because, you don't have Awakening anymore. But actually, what I'm finding is that it's very true. It's very interesting. The format feels, like I guess overall just quite aggressive, and it'll be interesting to see what people bring as kind of, I guess, solutions or ways to attack that. And I think I'm with you. Like, I don't think the innovation is maybe as high as I thought it might have been when I knew we were going to get a ban. And then that ban eventuated, and I was like, yeah, okay, there's definitely things to look at. And there's definitely things to look at outside of the box. But will those be to the level that we maybe were anticipating? I'm not sure. So yeah, regardless, I'm super excited to get to the Pro Tour. It's in, like I say, just, a week from now. See everyone, meet everyone, have an amazing time, and enjoy regardless of the results of the event. But obviously there to play and to win.
Mm-hmm. It's a funny thing, right? Because I think from like a data standpoint, most of the Flesh and Blood metas that have felt aggressive have actually been won by defensive decks. We have Monarch, actually, I mean, probably you could count Tails as that, with Oldhim sort of being a breakout soon after Orlando. And
Orlando. Michael Hamilton won with...
Michael. Yeah, you're right. He won at Orlando. You're correct. Yeah, so maybe literally every major North American event that has been in a so-called aggressive meta has been won by a defensive deck. Something to consider. I would think almost every deck, every North American calling as well, constructed calling, has been won by an innovative deck, where there has been like sort of a premier best deck, that was perceived. there's been some sort of innovation that's won those. I think you could put nationals under that, even though Lightning Briar was kind of leaked before in the United Kingdom, obviously through their national stream. But yeah, I mean, it's just something to consider, right? When things look simple, there usually is like, someone who's sort of cracked the code. So
yeah,
that's what we're trying to do.
To some degree. I mean, you could say the win in Indianapolis, maybe, Star of the Show wins that, but it's a slightly different take that Michael has on
Quite
how other people are playing Star of the Show, which, yeah, so I think you can keep that. But when is a trend not a trend, Brendan? When it's no longer a trend. So always worth keeping in mind. But
what was that?
Regardless.
Socrates or what?
I think that was Plato.
Oh, yeah. Okay, makes sense. I feel like I've heard that one before. Anyway, Hayden. Oh God, the freaking Socrates one just gets me. Let's talk about the news. We got some headlines for our judges out there.
Yeah, Judge Hub has landed this week, which is the new platform that LSS have launched. Still in development, but it's basically an interface for judges and tournament organizers to find judges. So you can do all things from taking level 0, which is the rules advisor, and level 1 tests through this new platform. You can register as a judge, and if you are a judge, I recommend you go and do this because if you are registered as a judge on the Judge Hub platform, tournament organizers can find you. They can, it sounds a bit ominous, doesn't it? They can get in contact with you to ask you if you can judge an event, is basically what I mean. And you can also register your interest for events. So it looks like LSS are putting up events, or the tournament organizers can put up events and say expression of interest for these events, whether it be things like callings, pro tours, I think even down to road to nationals and pro quests, although don't quote me on that. All I can see at the moment is the Las Vegas calling event. But yeah, I think this is a really great step forward for tournament organizers, for OP, and how this is going to go forward, and another step towards having this fleshed out judge program, which I'm sure will come through with like education and things in the future as well. But yeah, I think it's great to see. I've gone and registered myself on there as a level 1 judge. If you are a judge, I would say go and make sure you put yourself down, register your details, and if you do want to become a judge, a level 0 or level 1 judge, you can go and do the test through there. Make sure you study up and go and hit those. So yeah, Brendan, are you becoming a judge anytime soon?
I think you know the answer, and that's I couldn't pass the freaking test.
That's not what I thought you were going to say, but fair enough. Otherwise, Brendan, Battle Hardened Pittsburgh happened over the weekend. This was the last pre-ban event, the last big event that we're going to see before we head into the Pro Tour. It was won by Star of the Show, but bearing in mind this is a pre-ban, so still with Awakening, still with Scalata, still with Autumn's Touch, and was won by Charles Dunn. So big congrats to Charles. Charles is now a 2-time Battle Hardened champion after winning, I think it was the Philadelphia one, back when Star of the Show had its kind of breakout. He was one of the players who brought that deck to the first Everfest kind of event and piloted it to a victory. So yeah, I mean, one thing I did want to ask you, Brendan, about this, just while we're kind of looking at this, is they did produce a meta recap for Battle Hardened Pittsburgh. 29% of the field playing Star of the Show, 14% of the field playing Prism, 14% of the field playing Viserai, 11% of the field playing, 14% of the field playing Chain, 11% Viserai. Really interesting. 25%, almost the same as what the Star of the Show representation is coming out of this Runeblade kind of meta. My thoughts are that we're not actually going to see much of a shift from this kind of percentage against the Pro Tour, and I thought this is a really interesting sort of Yeah.
I think Prism will be like nothing. I mean, if someone brings Prism to, I don't know, it depends, right? It depends what you see in testing. Like if Star of the Show looks like it's overwhelmingly the best deck in your testing team, then it could be a good idea to bring Prism. But I promise you, there's going to be a lot of chains, and oh my goodness, is that matchup miserable for Prism. Like maybe you change the deck, right? Like maybe you build Prism in a different way where it has more cards that block, less auras, maybe more heralds, whatever it is. But I think the power level of the game has crept to an extent that Prism can't be the jack of all trades anymore. And if it tries to be, it's going to be the master of none. So that, at least the Prism deck in its past iteration, like we saw in the Calling Indianapolis, or maybe even at the Battle Hardened Pittsburgh here, I highly doubt that deck will have any reasonable success at the Pro Tour because of all the chain. And I think there's going to be a ton.
Very interestingly, how many Prisms do you think are in the top 8 of Battle Hardened Pittsburgh?
0.
Yeah, it was 0.
It was 0? That was a total guess, yeah.
Star of the Show, 1 Chain, 1 Viserai. I think coming off the back of Indianapolis, obviously, people thought that start of the show had a much better time into Prism with a few tweaks and things like this, and it seemed to show through in Pittsburgh. Although Prism was down in representation with things like Chain being up and even Viscera kind of around where it was. So yeah, look, really interesting. I think there's definitely other decks out there, but I mean, all I know, Brendan, is that there's going to be a corner of the room on Saturday during the main event of Prism players and Bolton players, and they want to have a word with you. That's all I know.
For sure. Yeah, they call that so there's this concept as you progress through the tournament. There's a winner's meta and there's a loser's meta. And as you get stuck losing early rounds, all you do is play other people on decks like Prism because they're really poorly positioned for this tournament. No, I'm totally kidding. Like every time I say Prism sucks, it wins tournaments. So I'm actually doing you all a favor if you're planning on bringing Prism to the Pro Tour. I tend to actually eat my words.
For what it's worth, I think Prism is better than Brendan's saying, but I do agree. There's problems that you face. You need to have solutions to that. But every hero that's done well in metas leading up to things has had issues. Like leading into Indianapolis, Bravo, Prism's a real big issue. People solved that. You know what I mean? Like people came with solutions to that. It's not like you can't. It's just that maybe Prism's is a bit wider of an issue. But we'll see.
All right, Hayden. I'm gonna have to shoot a news item in here because I just remembered it and it was freaking hilarious. So Legendary Studio actually updated the ratings. The ELO ratings this past week. So they like backdated and retroactively added in all the Road to Nationals, which is like it was an accident. They reverted it. Will they add in Road to Nationals and the ProQuest season? I don't know. They also added in Battle Hardened. So it was literally everything except ProQuest. But there was some funny things that came up because you would think, okay, that's just weird. Like if I say this, you're thinking like the only funny thing is like some people went up, some people went down. People played mean decks and they got punished for it. But no, I actually looked at my ELO and how it changed. And they only added Road to Nationals and only added ProQuest. And I've never played a limited ProQuest. And my limited ELO went down for no reason. I lost 20 ELO for no reason in limited. And I was like, I didn't know because I looked and I was like, wow, I don't remember being like ranked 54 in like limited ELO. I was like, okay, maybe some people went up somehow, whatever it is. And yeah, I just like randomly lost 20 from nothing. It's just like a total bug, which is hilarious. But yeah, I went up a few ranks. But after they readjusted, I'm back to my normal rank. Went down. One thing to know is I played the Battle Hardened in Dallas, right? I went 8-3. I made top 4. I would have lost 6 ELO for that entire event. Just to put in perspective of like, I was like, what the heck? Actually, but here's the thing. It's like when they were calculating the ELO, it wasn't calculating your K value and win and loss like for your rating at the time. It was using your current rating and then putting it against those players at their current rating now. So it was a whole funny thing. I remember people freaking out on Twitter, but I just can't. It's just so funny how I lost 20 limited ELO.
I just watched and observed, and then I saw that it was a mistake, which I thought it must have been, just given how it was done. So, retroactively, I can't see LSS doing that. That would be, I think, quite a poor decision. But yeah, it was definitely fun to see the reactions. And then I saw a bit of banter between Mr. Matt Rogers and Michael Hamilton as Matt overtook Michael again based on, some ELO changes. And then that got quickly reverted. So Matt had his number 1 spot back for all of about 24 hours before Michael reclaimed it.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Elsewhere in the news, actually, there's a little article that's just gone up on fabtcg.com. If you haven't already seen it, by the time you hear this podcast, it'll be a day old now. But just featuring, I guess, some conversations, some interviews with players headed to the Pro Tour. There's national champions in there, there's calling champions in there, and just a few cool questions from LSS. Everyone's got different questions, which I didn't know when I answered my question. So interesting to see what else people had said. But otherwise, come and see us at Jersey. If you're going to be in New Jersey, we'll be there hanging out, I think, on Sunday afternoon, while we're watching top 8s and hopefully playing in top 8s. But afterwards, we'll be hanging around the venue for a little bit to chat and catch up with anyone who wants to come over to, come and talk strategy, talk decks for the ProQuest season, whatever it is. We'll be around to chat, and, we can even sign something for you if you really want that. I don't know why you want that.
Oh my God. Look at this guy.
Brendan will sign your Boltons and your Prisms for you. So,
just seek us out. We're going to be really hard to find. Just kidding. Probably the easiest people to find the entire venue with
you will be
the beacon.
Yeah, I'm a bit more incognito. Yeah.
It's the beacon. It's our like our team meetup. It's just on like that little speck of white in the crowd of people. Oh man,
you do have to crouch down to see it, but
yeah, it is quite low. All right, just want to give a big shout out to all of our Arsenal Pass patrons. Your support does help us do what we do. Hayden and I did an additional pod for the Patreon recently, and I think it turned out really well. But yeah, if we do have additional content on there, including extra podcasts, like I said, but also deck techs and deck guides, wait for that ProQuest season to come. There's going to be some hot ones in there, as well as additional content, like Hayden and I commentating over some of the national championship coverages, or did we do any others? Then we do my losses on camera. We'll go ahead and commentate those ones as well. Well, anyway, take us into that mailbag. Or no, it's the news section. Oh, God.
We've just got a quick in the comment section, which we've done the last 2 weeks. We get some great feedback on our pods and some good constructive feedback as well. Robust constructive feedback. But some of the things I like to do is just read through and just see what people are kind of saying back on the pod. And we had a couple of interesting ones, Brendan. We had a couple of questions. Are we twins? Darren's wife asked if we're twins. Not that I know of, but I haven't actually seen my birth certificate, I don't think. So I don't know. Who knows?
You are far more handsome than me. I don't think it's possible.
Well, I don't have blonde hair, so I don't know.
I don't either. That's the thing.
Well, apparently. A lot of talk about Lexi in the comments last week. We talked about the kind of new meta and what's happening with the ban restricted, the ban suspended announcement, and what that kind of means. And a lot of people really high on Lexi, and I can see that. I think it's interesting which kind of Lexi you bring. But we have multiple people talking about the success they're having in testing and in local armories already. Playing with friends, whatever it might be, already in the first week. So yeah, and Bo saying Lexi is slowly fighting her way to the top. I don't disagree. I think Lexi is a good choice potentially coming into this next round of what this meta looks like prior to Uprising. Brennan, someone was surprised that you hadn't thrown shade at Bolton, but that came just on the hour mark, so they weren't disappointed with that.
Come on. You know me too well. Bolton Sabres. Well, the thing is like Bolton, probably cool. Bolton Sabres, I just think that deck is kind of whack. But, bring it to the Pro Tour, see what happens. And if you don't win, I'm going to make fun of you.
You've got some questions about Bolton in the mailbag, so don't you worry about that. Rhinar gets a bit of a shout out from Ethan. Thinks Rhinar might be the truth. Maybe we're sleeping on it. It's the deck that we're looking for. Not as sure, but maybe. We've been asked if we can do a live Arsenal Pass podcast at the Pro Tour. Brendan, I don't unfortunately think it's going to be possible.
Might be a little bit of background noise, eh?
Sound equipment and gear, but we might record something while we're in person. We did last time when we were in Indianapolis. Wait, no, we were in Orlando, and we recorded something. So we'll see what we can do. And last question, which came from in the comment section, Brendan, could Katsu be good in this format, or in either format actually, Blitz or Classic Constructed?
Ooh, not sure about Blitz right now. But I wonder if in Constructed, like Katsu can be good. I don't know if like normal Katsu can be good. But I wonder if you can play Control Katsu and like Fatigue, some Rune Blades, just play like Value, and some other sort of regular aggro decks that aren't necropotencing every turn. And then maybe like Fatigue out Starvo, but probably it's terrible. That's the thing. But maybe we just go back to our roots. We play some Control Katsu at the Pro Tour. Hayden, what do you think?
I mean, even bigger than that is a real card.
It's a real card.
I've definitely found over playing Everfest and even the last few weeks. So it's a real card.
My issue with Katsu is I feel like a lot of the additions to the ninja class have been like side grades, and not like just strict upgrades. Where if like you look at like Runeblade, it's like Revel and Runeblood, Swarming Gloomveil. Like it's just ridiculous. Illusionist, Miraging Metamorph, all the zero cost auras, like. Yeah, and I feel like Ninja has just gotten other ways to play the class. Well, it hasn't power crept like too much. So I just don't know if it can compete. Its armor also sucks. So it does seem like in Flesh and Blood, there seems to be sort of a consistency that if, decks that are very powerful tend to have like what we call fridges. Like they have a lot of armor. And I feel like it's just becoming more and more important to have access to that in modern Flesh and Blood.
Well, yeah, don't worry though. We are getting a new ninja with Uprising, so if you are a bit worried about Katsu, maybe
we're getting a Runeblade too. Isn't that crazy?
No, we're not.
We're getting a room blade. I'll be all excited.
This guy. All right, Brendan. No Command and Cookout this week. Although you're firing up like a friggin' commercial kitchen for this mailbag, so don't worry about that. But if you do have questions for future Command and Cookout sections, each week we do answer a viewer/listener question. Get them in. You can do that through Twitter. You can email them to us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. You can drop them in the YouTube comments below and just let us know that it's for the Command and Cookout. You can write them on a little note and hand them to us at the Pro Tour in New Jersey if you really want to. Whatever way you want to get them to us, please go ahead and do it. But otherwise, Brendan, we're going to head into the mailbag. We have a lot of great questions for our... I think it's our third mailbag I think that we've done. We did kind of a mini one once as well, very, very early on in the pod. We've got a few kind of different chunks of questions from Twitter. I did put a call out on Twitter. I also asked our amazing community Discord for our patrons for some questions as well. So we have some fun questions from people. We also have some questions about the meta. We have some more macro-based questions about just the game in general, how we approach it. So a lot of really good questions. But I thought, let's start with some of the fun questions, Brendan, and we'll see what we can get through. This first question comes from Cold Foil Hands on Twitter at Cold Foil Hands. Actually, this is for me, Brendan. I'm starting with a question for myself.
I can answer it for you if you want.
Yeah, well, it's fun questions, Hayden, you mentioned recently that you attended the F1 Aussie Grand Prix. What is your current favorite driver and constructor? Also, is Brendan an F1 fan? Well, first of all, Brendan, are you a Formula One fan? I think you're not much of a sports fan at all, are you?
Not traditional sports, so like F1 would probably be something that would pique my interest, I guess. There's not a lot of exposure, I feel like, in the United States, but maybe I'm just ignorant. But yeah, I haven't watched like any F1 other than like one time when I was in Monaco, I think, or Monaco. Like that, they do the F1 race there, yeah?
They do.
Yeah. They were setting up for it, and it was going to be like the day before we left. I didn't get to see it though. Yeah, regarding the sports thing, so actually, I don't follow any sports. All I do is watch, like, I follow UFC, and I watch that like every weekend, and that's it. Nothing else. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of like the stories behind sport. Whether it be like strategies, teams, the like mentality of the drivers. I really like what happens behind the sport. I think like I don't really get invested in Cold Full Hands asked do I have a favorite driver or constructor, which is the people who make the cars. That's the teams effectively. Not necessarily. I'm not like an avid big fan. Being here in Australia, Daniel Ricciardo is from Australia, so a big Daniel Ricciardo fan. Valtteri Bottas, who is a Finnish driver, is probably my favorite. Just very interesting guy. I've listened to some podcasts that he's done, and he's just like a really interesting competitor. So I had my Alfa Romeo shirt on while I was in Melbourne for the Australian Grand Prix, but otherwise, no, not really. Just interested in more what's kind of happening behind. Although I do love watching the race weekends as well, and being there was phenomenal. Like the sounds of the cars and the speed was great. Next question comes from @Coops013 on Twitter. This is a great question, Brendan. Which one of you guys takes the L when you're in the top 8 paired together? Does Brendan APG pull the rug out from everyone and show up with Kano? And will Fiendale retire and go into commentary if he wins the whole thing? Just a few of many potential questions. Well, let's just quickly run through these, Brendan. Who takes the L in the top 8? I mean, we fight hard for it, of course. We go, we lock horns. We have an amazing game, and it's one of the most memorable games of Flesh and Blood ever, I'm sure.
Yeah, surely I just high roll Hayden. Out of my mind, play the most unfair game of Flesh and Blood in my life, and it's just a total non-game. And I hope everybody's there to watch and just witness the disappointment.
I mean, I can't win a game on camera against you, Brendan, so it would
that is true, but I can't win a game on camera, period. So this is gonna be quite the battle.
Yeah, the guy who can't win a sanctioned or game of Flesh and Blood on camera, and the guy who
technically
can't
false
beat
now,
that guy on camera.
Yeah, technically false now, but well, okay, it's fine.
True. Will you be pulling the rug out from everyone and bringing Kano?
Yeah,
that's the next question.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay. Will I retire and go into commentary? Probably not. I mean, I might retire at some point, but it probably won't be after this Pro Tour, and I don't know if it'll be for commentary. We're gonna move on. Oh, you got a question?
No. I just feel like you're gonna do commentary eventually. You're just like, you're that guy,
I'm that guy.
You just welcome to Wraith Boomer, just like unusually presentable, kind of not a degenerate. It's like, this guy looks like a commentator.
Everyone's a little bit of a degenerate who plays Flesh and Blood, and that's true. And if you listen to this and you disagree with us, why are you listening?
Your hair is not even white, dude. You're a normal person.
It's true. You know what? People get me with their Twitter and Discord handles, and I feel like I need to practice these before I read them out. So maybe next time you can do that.
Which one got you?
But Lurt1 on Twitter says, "What did Bolton do wrong? And what tools does Raiden Bolton need to get to earn some respect with Brendan?"
I mean,
actually, this is a real question, right? Yeah. Like, apart from the fact that, well, first of all, what did Bolton do wrong, Brendan?
Well, use the correct prefix there with Raiden Bolton rather than Sabres Bolton. So that's where my infinite hate comes from. Is like, it's just the least interactive combo deck in Flesh and Blood that just tries to draw a sequence of cards that allows it to do uninteractable damage, which is cool, but like you literally don't play the game outside of that. So I don't know. I just think the deck sucks. And it's also, if it was good, it would be really bad game design. So I'm happy that it sucks. Raiden Bolton's a really cool class, really cool concept. This idea of like managing your soul, and also potentially setting up for later turns in the game where you sort of pop off with that with like the Beacon of Victory, etc., etc. So I actually really like Bolton. Just like Warrior has been in a bizarre place, but I'm very okay with that. Coming from Welcome to Wraith, Arcane Rising, and even Crucible, where Warrior was just an absolute force to be reckoned with. So I don't miss it quite yet, but it should come back.
Yeah, I think if you're asking about what does Raiden Bolton need to earn some respect with Brendan, but what do I think it needs to become a force in any given meta? I think it just needs a few more cards that can play on your off turns or options. I think your off turn options are maybe not quite good enough now. What I mean by that is you need to be often having like 2, 3, 4 card hands even to be able to push damage and to be able to load your soul at least 2 cards, often 3 cards. Is quite difficult. So I think you need something on those kind of off turns that can maybe offset that. I don't know what that might be. Maybe there's a card that allows you to take a card from Banish and put it into your soul somehow. Something like that could be interesting for an off turn. Or just a little bit more stretch damage. I think of something, I really like the idea of like Valiant Thrust. I think that card's really cool. What could that look like at a Majestic level? Is there some way to push a bit more damage onto a card like that? Or an on-hit effect even potentially could be really cool. So yeah, I think those are the kind of things I would love to see maybe Raiden Bolton have in the future, or just Bolton in general, but some of them might be a bit good. I think the design space is really tricky with that hero because it requires this kind of management of your soul like Brendan talked about. But then a lot of it is just raw damage. So maybe it could be stuff to interact with Raiden more as well. That could be interesting. Obviously, we have Courageous Steelhand at the moment, but what else could we maybe have?
Yeah.
Speaking, of course.
I wonder if it would need quite a bit, just because this like era of Flesh and Blood has just been very, very quick, right? A lot of racing. I mean, like I said, you know, the controller decks have won a lot of these tournaments, but the metas have been very aggressive. And I just think that Bolton tends to sort of struggle against those decks that try to play 3-turn or 4-turn games, you know?
Yeah, the opportunity cost of these cards that you're using to go into your soul is kind of the thing that hurts Raiden at the moment in these formats, where the value of a card is really precious. I think when you're playing into these aggressive strategies, and I think that's kind of what's hurting it. So yeah, maybe it could just be a timing thing as well about the meta we're in. We have a question from Absolute Royalty, Brendan. We have a question from the Tall Timmy, at the Tall Timmy one on Twitter. If you don't know the Tall Timmy, you got to go check him out. Brendan, he's one of your best friends. He's one of my best friends.
I mean, obviously. He calls me all the time. Like, the guy just
apparently
won't stop.
I call him all the time.
Yeah. No, I mean, he likes to pretend like I'm calling him, but that guy rings my phone day and night.
So the Tall Timmy does ask, it's time for some speculation. 3 questions here. Which country will have the highest representation in the top 8 of Pro Tour 1, Brendan? I'm going to go pretty safe here and just say the US.
You almost said North America, and I would love to say North America too, but it's going to be the United States.
I was going to try and cop out for a second and be like, well, just rather than country, I'll say North America. But no, I'll say America. I'll say the United States. I think it's going to have the highest representation of players in the top 8.
Yeah.
Which deck will have the highest representation of Pro Tour 1? I think we just talked about this at the start of the show. I think it's going to be star of the show still.
Could be Chain. Representation. It's not top 8 representation. It is just representation. I think that Chain's a pretty attractive deck for a lot of people. It feels powerful. You get a lot of card advantage, and yeah, I could see a lot of people playing Chain, because the current version of Chain is what some people fell in love with in Monarch. Not myself, but like this version of Chain is very aggressive, and it can do some crazy stuff. So maybe people like that play pattern more than Starvo. I know that when I was in Indianapolis, there was many of people that came up to me, and a few of them were playing Starvo, and a lot of them were begrudgingly playing Starvo. So I think if it's even remotely close, a lot of those people might be on chain.
Yep, good point. Number 3, will Brendan APG day 2 the first pro?
I mean,
pro tour. Of course he will.
You have to day 2 to win the tournament. So like, I mean, if I'm already the champion, then like I just Timmy, we talked about this. We hung on the call. Like, I basically already have the trophy. Like, what do you mean? What is this? I feel like we had this conversation. So this question coming from Timmy is just, he must be messing around. I don't know.
We have some more fun questions, but I do want to get into some of the other ones, so we might circle back to it if we have time. Otherwise, we'll save these for another, maybe a rainy day. I want to talk about meta next, Brendan, because we do have some great questions on the meta as well. So this first question comes from 2 Chains or More on Twitter. Where do you think Katsu? So actually, this is kind of an extension of the question we asked before. So if there's anything to add on this, otherwise we might kind of move through. But I did think it was interesting. Where do you think Katsu fits in the post-ban Pro Tour meta? Can the aggro build do the same thing that Briar and Chain might be doing, but better? I'm guessing because of the on-hit effects, or worse. Any specific any spice cards worth looking at for us still stuck on playing the Lord of Wind in this current meta? So we already said that we felt. You talked about control. Could that be spicy? What about, I guess, any kind of other ways you could look at this? Like, my kind of overall takeaway from Katsu is that it's just a little bit underpowered. And like you said, the cards it's had so far have been side grades, unfortunately. That's how it feels.
Yeah, and we should kind of dig into this idea of on-hit triggers. Because Katsu does have a lot of on-hit triggers. But a lot of them are just kind of more damage. And there's like vanilla damage. And if your hero's already doing less damage, then they're not really on hit triggers. Obviously Mask Momentum, drawing a card, big deal. But some of these things, they don't really count as on hit triggers to me. When Starvo's on hit triggers, like put 2 cards at the bottom of your deck, don't get go again, skip your turn. It's like, yeah, Katsu doesn't really have the card text on those triggers to compete, I don't think.
Yep, I think we talked about the rest of it before, but a Shishinelli says replacement for cross strap and Rhinar Blitz. I think you just got to go Barkbone strapping at the moment. I haven't looked too much at Blitz right now, but I will, because of course we do have the teams calling, and there's one right here in my home city, so I will be playing that. I think Barkbone strapping is the place to start. If the format's going to slow down a bit now with things like Kano and Viserai and stuff being touched, maybe you go back to Tunic. Maybe you play both Tunic for slower matchups like Ultim and something like Barkbone strapping for more aggressive matchups. You also get that defensive value. So, yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
No, same thing.
Arcade might be worth looking at, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm playing Blood Drop, I'm probably playing Barkbone strapping. Barkbone strapping just seems a bit superior, most likely, in that deck. But yeah, maybe in the slower decks you pack a Tunic. So I agree.
Mask of Momentum at Mask of Momentum on Twitter says, what surprise decks would you feel could top 8 the PT?
Yeah, so the one that would surprise me the most would be Prism, but obviously there's going to be a few players on that, and I don't think a lot of other people would be surprised on that. So we have to think about like decks that haven't been super dominant in most recent times, right? Like in very recent metas. So let me think. Lexi? Lexi can definitely top 8, for sure. Yeah, I think I wouldn't even be particularly surprised at that one. Once we get past Lexi, that's where I think I start to get surprised. Like any of the other the decks under that, like any like Riot. Yeah, I mean like any hero from Welcome to Wraith, surprising. Any hero from Arcane Rising, surprising. Maybe Dash sneaks in there. Eh? Maybe Kano.
Viserai's still around.
Yeah, Viserai's still around. I'm really interested to see how much Viserai shows up. I feel like we've like criminally under talked about that one. Still a very good deck, but that deck, there were some strategies that it struggled against, and it used a little chess piece to help out, and that's gone. So
yeah, I think if you talk about what surprises could actually top 8, like in like being legitimate about it, like what could actually have a chance to top 8, I do think there's a few, and like I would be surprised if I would be like, oh, Alexi may top 8. That would give me a little bit of a surprise, a good one. I think at this point, I think I wouldn't be that surprised if Briar top 8'd, Star of the Show, Chain, of course. Viserai, I don't even think still necessarily I'd be surprised. But then, yeah, like I think the ones that could make it would at the top of that list would be Lexi. I feel like it's still not being talked about as much. I think the settling on a list that can play well into the field is not necessarily easy. It's not like in that Briar format where Ice Lexi just absolutely preyed on what was 40% of the format. It's not really like that in this format. So yeah, Livia. I think Livia is potentially something that could, I would be very surprised, but I do think maybe it could have a chance. Although, I won't put any money on it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Speaking of, and there might be a reason I said this, we do have a next question, which is from @mansantfab on Twitter. Hayden said that Livia was the second best deck in Monarch format. Just no one was playing it. They agree. With Chain being top dog again, question mark. Okay, that's something that's definitely a question people are saying. Does Livia still feel like she can compete with him, or is Rosetta allowing an early game that Seeds plus Riftbind did not? I personally find the matchup getting worse. That's a great question, actually. To be honest, I haven't played a bunch of Livia recently, but I did at the start of Everfest format. It's something I looked at. I have played some games recently. I have tried some things with it as a deck that I definitely looked at and thought, could there, it's a deck that plays Husk. Is there something here? I kind of agree with what Mansan's saying. Like, Rosetta Thorn is so efficient. Like, yes. It's so hard to have a strategy as a deck that wants to do a little bit of blocking and a little bit of attacking. It makes it quite difficult. So yeah, I honestly think that matchup is in the Monarch meta. I thought Livia into Chain was like pretty close, in all honesty, because you had this deck that was like playing quite aggressively into you, that you got to throw cards into the bin with. And be able to defend quite efficiently because you didn't have something like Rosetta Thorn, and then also be able to set up your own game plan and come in. But then also, like, they weren't playing Belittle in that sort of format as well. They weren't playing these like wide stuff. Some were, but it was far and few between because you had things like Seeds and you were setting up more for like the danger was like turns 5 to 6 in the old Chain decks. And now like you're kind of in danger on like turns 2 and 3 from just like 16, 17 damage turns, and that's. I think that's tougher for something like Livia to deal with because it doesn't get that kind of advantage of having gas from the very start like it used to in that matchup. So yeah, I think it's getting harder.
Does Rosetta Thorn even make sense from a design standpoint? It just like negates every other possible weapon. Yeah, I think it's just hilarious. Like a 1 for 4. That is like the Arcane is also a single instance, which is like actually very significant. That weapon is very good. I mean, unless it gets banned or rotted, I think that's going to be our weapon for a while. And if we get a better one, man, it's going to be Runeblade for the next decade.
Well, don't forget that once Briar hits Living Legend, Rosetta Thorn will leave. So we just need Briar to hit Living Legend.
Yeah, it's coming.
Which isn't out of the question, right? It's not definitely not out of the question. That deck was, one of the best decks in a previous format. Could well come back around. Shaman Heroic is still a very real card. I expect to see Briar in some decent numbers at the Pro Tour, and I think it's a good choice. One last question on the meta, although then we go into some macro questions, which do touch a little bit on the current format. But this comes from Investing Noob on Discord. What cards that are not commonly played do you think are the most likely to become essential cards in future metas as the card pool expands? Which are the most interesting to you? I'm thinking of stuff like Crucible with Dread Scythe, etc. That's what Investing says, which feels like it could have a place in some type of Viz build eventually. But while the current card pool isn't good, yeah, I guess with the current card pool not being good. So what are some cards that we think could be staples in the future, Brendan, that maybe aren't right now, but could well be there one day? Any thoughts from your side? I mean, the one we've come back to multiple times is Chains of Eminence, and it's never been that relevant. Yeah. But
it's only good against a degenerate combo, I think. Like the card itself is just not good enough. Like even at naming a 9 of, like Seeds was like a relevant thing to name, and yeah, it's like. You could play Chains of Eminence, or you can play Frostlock, and that's like 50 times better. Yes.
Yeah, people play Chains of Eminence against me in Australian Nationals into Viscerai. Like it was a plan that people had into Viscerai to name things like Read the Runes, or like on the combo turn, just name Sonata. It never once impacted me, unfortunately. 4 or 5 times it was played against me. So
happened when we played Chain and Monarch, same thing. Like people play Chains of Eminence. Like, oh, you got a red card that blocks for 2, and you're gonna name some card that's not gonna impact my turn. Like, I mean, a lot of times, like even if you have it in your hand, it's like I'm just gonna arsenal that card. But yeah, Chains of Eminence is
when you drew 2 seeds. They got you, and you had 2 seeds.
Yeah, then you only do 15 damage rather than 20. Yeah, Chains of Eminence is. I think it's gonna be relevant when there's like a degenerate combo in the game. Yeah. Like so, Talisman of Warfare. I wonder if there's any like merit to that. So the cost of playing items is extremely high, and it just doesn't seem like the meta for it. But that triggers off Rosetta Thorn, right? The Talisman of Warfare with the 2. Mm-hmm. So, like, I just wonder if that's, like, reasonable. The issue with Talisman of Warfare, I think, is that it's actually the fridge. It's not that the Talisman of Warfare ability isn't good enough, and even you like playing an item to get that ability isn't good enough. It's that when you swing for 2, and you like you just get blocked by armor, and it kind of blows. So that's one that I sort of had on my radar. But other than that, I think like Expose the Elements saw quite a bit of play last meta, but is still like a very relevant card, and it's probably going to be one of the more impactful cards. Maybe not in the Pro Tour, but at least in the next couple of years. It's a really, really powerful card.
Yeah, I think one card I'll shout out is Arcane Lantern. I think that card's going to become like a staple for a lot of classes in future formats, just because of how we continue to explore arcane damage. We continue to explore like one-handed and two-handed weapons, and I think Arcane Lantern could legitimately become a card that's quite important. The other one that I think we haven't seen as much of, but could become something in the future is This Round's on Me. I think that card is.
Oh, that card's so good. Yep.
Yeah, very interesting as well.
This Round's on Me plus Crown of Seeds is just like, what an interaction. Crown of Seeds. Unfortunately, that one sees a lot of play, but oh my god. That is a crazy card. That is a crazy card. Sorry.
That's not going anywhere.
Total. I digress.
Any others from your side? I think those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. I think there's more class-specific ones that, we'll see down the line. But
yeah.
Soul Shield, I think, is probably
say the warrior
staple,
one.
But Unified Decree.
Yep, there it is. It wouldn't be an underrated card without a mention of Unified Decree.
It's underrated. I don't think it's going to become a staple. I'll tell you what. I think some of the light cards that, because of Prism kind of being the only light deck that sees play, and less than, I guess, prominence than Chain has had over the 3 formats so far. Weirdly, even if that's not necessarily true, but the last format Prism played a lot of Tunic over Vestige of Soul. But I think cards like Vestige of Soul and Soul Shield down the line become very, very staple again in these light decks.
Yeah.
Okay, we have some more macro-based questions just about the game in general. There's some really fun questions in here as well, but more about maybe our approach to the game, and less about specific meta. To be honest, this is a bit of a catch-all as well. I've just chucked some questions in this category, but we start with Pat Smashgod from our Twitter, from our Discord community. Saying, what would each of you consider as your biggest weakness as a player, and what work do you put in to overcome that? Because I've just sprung this on Brendan, I had a little think about this, so I can start, Brendan. But for me, it's definitely like aspects of micro play. I think in general, I have very clear lines of play in my head when I play Flesh and Blood. I think those are things that just it's pretty natural. But then some of the things that kind of take me away from that is I might have these lines in my head and just forgetting a lot of micro plays. That kind of idea of just clean play. We've used the example of missing Snapdragon Scalers. Both me and Brendan have done it in the past. It still haunts me, missing a top 8 off Snapdragon Scalers.
Okay, it could have been a calling final, right?
It would have been it was a ProQuest top 8.
Okay, mine was in a Collins final with my Snapdragons.
Yeah. But it's still, those are the things that sit on my mind, and that's one of the things I do, I think, to improve on those kind of micro plays is think about these things, is not dwell on them, but just remind myself that these are the things that cost me games. And when I'm playing games of Flesh and Blood, one of the biggest things I think like level ups me is that I just take a game at a time. I don't start to think about, if I am now 2-1 the next 3 rounds, I'm locked for this, or if I just have to 1-2, so just win one more round. I think those take me out of it. I try and play just game to game and then focus on my micro play, even to the extent that when I get into a game, if I have a strategy for the game overall, cool, that's fantastic, and I always want to have that. Now I'm starting to think phase by phase. Okay, like early game, these are the key things I've got to remember. These are the things I'm really focused on for this matchup. These are the only things that are really important to me. Oh, okay, something else comes up, and now I'm moving on to the mid game. Okay, what are the things that are important in the mid game? And then focus on that turn to turn. Like, make sure I'm doing my sequencing correctly. Okay, well, before I even play out my turn, the sequence is in my head, and now I just need to make sure that I do that. Even to the extent of, like, sometimes in my hand, I'll, like, hold the cards left to right of, like, how I'm going to sequence them. Or I might, like, as I'm, like, going through the line in my head, I'm like, okay, like, put this card down, put this card down. These are, like, the 3 cards, and then that's how I'm going to play it. And then I pick them back up, and I'm just like visualizing how those are going to play out in my head. And any onboard things I need to, like a Snapdragon Scalers, I'm thinking, okay, card 1, Snapdragons, card 2, card 3, for instance, and just making sure that repeats in my mind. And I'm really clear on my line, because once I've decided my line, I've already thought through all the things my opponent could or would do right. Unless they really surprise me with something I'm not expecting, it shouldn't change what I'm going to do. If I'm expecting them, if like, okay, they could Blizzard me, I probably already thought about that if I'm playing against an ice deck. So yeah, that might change my play, but it shouldn't change my like micro play and sequencing. So those kind of things of what I've tried to work on. What about yourself, Brendan?
Yeah. So for me, I'm just kind of bad and not very talented. So I try to surround myself with good players and develop systems and processes that can sort of outwork the competition and just sort of sweat through that. No, but like literally, like this is my first card game, and I don't think I'm particularly unique, like I don't know, uniquely talented at playing card games. I think we just put in sort of a lot of testing, a lot of time, and I've had been lucky to surround myself with players that are very successful at this game. And if you do that enough, at the end of the day, it's just patterns, right? Like it's just working. It's just recognizing patterns. There's not a lot of innovation or moments of genius that happen in games of Flesh and Blood. It's it's occasional, and when it happens, it's amazing, right? And that's sort of what we play the game for. But I find the vast majority of my games are the very face up in terms of, after I've tested and extensively tested and practiced for a format, I sort of understand and expect what can happen during the game, right? So yeah, I mean, it's all about hard work. That's honestly like my actual answer. It's like I don't think I could do this stuff in a vacuum. A lot of people probably couldn't, but particularly me, I don't think I could do it by myself.
Here's a question for you on the back of that, right? For viewers and listeners trying to maybe replicate some of what you do in terms of, you like to say, and correct me if I'm like paraphrasing and saying this incorrectly, but it's about the work you put in, right? And about the processes you have in terms of like the people you're testing with, the way that you're testing, the focuses you have in your testing, the process when you go to events, the process of selecting decks, whatever it is, it's all about process and work for you.
And networking.
So then when you come to what's that? Sorry.
Networking is probably huge with that. Yeah.
Okay. So when you come to an event, say Pro Tour next week, how are you translating all those things that happen in the lead up to what's actually happening in the event? Like, is there ways that you're specifically trying to like remember stuff? Is there how are you making sure that kind of translates into the event itself? And not saying into getting a result, but just into actually playing your games at the event.
Sure. It's also pre-work, right? It's also, you do that stuff before. You develop game plans, you develop, sideboard plans, and you play the deck a lot, and you sort of like, the patterns, I hate to use the word patterns again, but you've seen a lot of these lines before, right? They don't come as a surprise, and you just trust the process and trust your practice and trust what you and your team have figured out and what you think is correct, and you sort of follow those lines, and I think that will take you extremely far. Like it's really rare that you sort of need to innovate on the day of, and I think if you're consistently doing that, you're probably wrong. So yeah,
you're getting the pre-work wrong, right?
Yeah, it's about being like there's consistency is huge, and I think if like there's anything about sort of all the like the Flesh and Blood that I have played these past 2 years is that I've been like very consistent. Outside of like the ProQuest season where I had mono, but other than that, like I've just consistently performed well at a lot of these top tier events. Just haven't gotten the W yet. But yeah, a lot of that's literally all because of effort, and the people that I've been able to test with, right? That's huge, right? To have the, world-class deck builders, very good players from other games that are translating their skills into Flesh and Blood, or just people who are inherently talented at card games. Like surrounding yourself with the right people is just, I think it's the biggest tool you can use to sort of be competitive at something like Flesh and Blood. And yeah. That's it.
Can I ask one more follow-up question to this then? So just trying to translate this into like lessons to take away. What if something comes up during a game or something maybe changes for you in the event? Maybe there's a deck that you didn't have on your radar and you find out that like, you're going to have to play a couple of copies of that against a couple of copies of that on day 2 just because of the performance it's had. Like, how do you adjust? How do you adapt? If it's all pre-work or a lot of it's pre-work for you, what about on the day? Like, what happens then? Like, what goes through your head? How do you adjust and adapt if you need to?
Yeah, so that's interesting, right? Yeah, that's a hard question to answer because it is like
throwing the tough ones your way.
Well, like, how do you answer that question outside of like just like a really sort of non-descriptive word like creativity? Like, you do have to sort of sometimes you do have to figure it out. Like I remember in Indianapolis, like I had a lot of success into Starvo, particularly on Prism, and I remember when I got there, someone had told me about a particular Starvo deck that was being represented that had had a game plan specifically developed for Prism and had seen success through that. I was like, okay, what cards are they playing? Like, what do I need to play around, right? And like one of those cards I didn't have a lot of practice against was like Expose the Elements. So I sort of had to figure out, how am I going to play around Expose the Elements? How relevant is that card to my game plan if it's played against me, right? And how greedy do I play? And I don't know if my sort of pattern was correct, but like I found a lot of those Starvo matchups, except for the one that I lost, like right for my winning in, to be extremely favorable for me. So I knew the way that I was winning the game wasn't always just like absolutely maximizing my resources and maximizing my Tunic particularly. So sometimes if it wasn't for like a very impactful aura on the opponent's turn where I could pitch a blue and Tunic and maybe drop a Genesis or drop something really nasty like a Merciful Retribution at an opportune time, I actually like might sit that Tunic resource and just leave it up as insurance, because often you'll end a Prism turn with like one resource floating to play around Expose the Elements for like the first 3, maybe 4 turns of the game. Because after that, I'm likely so far ahead that Expose the Elements doesn't even really hurt me. I can just play auras and then play my heralds at the end of the chain. But
yep.
Yeah.
Cool.
That makes sense.
Good example there as well. Good example as well about how you adapt on the fly. For you, it's a lot of pre-work, but then there is some adapting. But also that adapting actually comes from just knowing your strategies and knowing your decks, etc., and how you can adapt.
Like, it's like, how do I win, right? That's
if you don't
question.
if you don't already know your core strategy and what you're trying to do down to a T, then trying to make those adjustments and adaptations are really tough. So, yeah, great question coming there, and I hope that was, dug a little bit into Brendan's there, but I think very worthwhile. Next question comes from our Discord again, from Bosun Blank. What do you think about the overall balancing of heroes in Flesh and Blood? Is it by design that certain heroes seem underpowered? We're looking at you, Azalea. This is a great question. Brendan, do you want to kick us off?
Is it by design? Well, yeah, technically it is by design, but is it intentional? I don't think so. Yeah, I think this gap has sort of particularly been noticeable this past year or so with the aggressive decks. I know Hayden and I talked a lot when Tails was coming out, when Ice was getting introduced, that was going to change, but not quite yet. And yeah, like we talked about, we're like, hey, the question was, what decks do you be surprised to top 8 at the event? It's pretty much all of the heroes from Arcane Rising and Welcome to Wraith, which is kind of funny. Obviously, Viserai is somewhat excluded because he's a Runeblade, so he gets a pass. But yeah, I mean, Runeblades are really strong, and they sort of constrict the meta, I think, especially in regards to mid-range decks. So yeah, I agree with the statement, but I don't. I don't think it was intentional.
Think it's necessarily by intent. Yeah, so it's interesting. I think part of it is and part of it isn't. And so I kind of agree with you, Brendan, and kind of disagree on some fronts. So I think some things have maybe unfolded a little bit differently to how Legend Story Studios envisioned it happening. And I think that is, we talked about this on some of the issues post-ban that we particularly have with the direction, and there's some things that need to be looked at from an internal standpoint. And one of those is expectation of how the development team, being quite small, thinks the game will play and how it in reality plays out. I think what I mean by that is that you take the idea of the Runeblade classes and stuff, and yes, there's things that can counter that, and there's things that potentially play really well into it, and et cetera, et cetera. But then you start to think about linear versus non-linear strategies, and a lot of what Runeblades do is a lot more linear, and it's a lot easier to understand and to enact consistently a game plan. With the non-linear side, that I think is more difficult, and that's where I think we see some of the unintentional gap come between heroes in terms of basically Hero X being easier to play than Hero Y, and the game plans being inherently easier to enact. Plus, just a linear plan being better into an unknown field, into wider range of heroes. So I think that's some of the unintentional comes in. Where some of the intentional comes in is something like, I think Azalea and James White said this was never intended to be in Arcane Rising, for instance. And I think that piece was potentially a little bit intentional, that Azalea might not have even been the first ranger that we saw. It could have been Lexi in the initial kind of process of where they were going with the design of the set. And I think in those kind of things, sometimes they have a hero that maybe they're not ready to be at a certain level for whatever reason. The cards they know are coming in the future, but they want to introduce this hero or this class now, or this idea of the way that you play. But they know very full well that may not be the most competitive. And I think you can't have a card game where you can't have every class in Flesh and Blood be competitive. It's just not going to work, right? It's not going to work from a balancing standpoint. It's just impossible to get there. So I think intentionally they know that some of these heroes may not have the time in the sun now, but then they come, right? I think about, things like maybe Viserai. Maybe they knew Viserai was strong, but didn't think it was like particularly maybe going to be one of the best in maybe the Crucible format, for instance. But they print Skalata, and then of course, you print Sonata, Revel and Runeblood. These other cards that are clearly very good for Viserai. And I think they would, at least have some semblance of a handle on that. So yeah, it's I agree with you partly, and then partly I think some of it is a little bit intentional, be it for the future of the game.
I think it's just like some of those classes and heroes are particularly less powerful than others now, right? Mm-hmm. Where Azalea was never strong per se, but I think he was like competitively viable, at least to an extent, right? But there's been like, we talk about Runeblade, right? But Starvo is the real offender here. I think that with Bravo Star of the show, like most of the heroes in Flesh and Blood can't even function at a basic level against that deck because of what it does. It's just kind of lame, right? Like your Azalea deck just like does nothing. She gets all the cards ripped from its hand, and then it does no damage on the swing back. So yeah, it's interesting. Like things like Bravo Star of the show, they just break sort of the normal design space of Flesh and Blood and end up sort of kind of breaking the game as well.
Yeah, I think maybe even if part of it is slightly intentional, there's like the unintentional overbears and takes away some of the interesting things that you could do with maybe like underdog heroes or dark horses or off meta choices, etc. Which I think that's something that LSS need to look at for the competitive side of the game as we move forward. There's actually a question that follows up for this, I think, or it's very similar in some ways, and that's from Copy Cody on Discord saying, can any hero build the best deck in the format through reps and practice, or is there a class or hero that has discernible advantage that meta slaves like at Brendan will exploit to win callings and events at any cost? But it's not really about that necessarily, is it? But it's about having the best chance and certain things. You can give that to you. Also, why is Rhino the best deck in the new meta? Sincerely, love the pod. So I think that is a kind of a fundamental that comes off the back of this. Maybe there's some intentional of some heroes maybe not in any given meta being as competitive, but then also there's the unintentional side, right? And I just talked about linear versus non-linear, yeah, Brendan. And there's always going to be formats. So you're talking about best deck in the format. Well, the meta is going to define the format. So while you might have a really powerful deck in one iteration of the meta in any given format for, say, Classic Constructed, once that meta changes, whether it be through bannings, whether it be through just general meta evolution, those decks are going to change. So take Prism, for example, right? Like maybe that moves from being okay to being really good, maybe back to being kind of medium, whatever. But that's meta evolution. So I think you're always going to have that to some degree. I wouldn't completely rule out that any hero can build the best deck in the format, but I think basically no. I think there's too many other factors that come in just apart from what that hero has access to and the game plans that it can enact and how good a player can be. I think there's other factors that come into it. Too many.
Yeah. There's opportunity. Like if there ever has been, I don't know if that's probably the incorrect statement, but I think that there is an opportunity for there to be a dark horse at the ProQuest. From my data, and from the data of all the people that I know, it doesn't look like that. But obviously, if someone found out, they wouldn't be sharing it with me because they know I would sleeve that bad boy up. But alas, this is a tournament where it can happen. Do I think it will? Nope. But unknown. Who knows, right? Like you ban just a few cards, it could open up the doors for, I don't know, not necessarily like a hero, right? But a game plan and a strategy, right? Yeah.
So my count, I think what I would say, like kind of echoing what you're saying, is that a best deck in the format isn't necessarily a dark horse can win, right? Like a deck that is set up as the perfect way for the format can win and can do so convincingly. It doesn't mean it's the best deck in the format, right? It just means it was the correct choice for that event. And I think those are two very different things. So I think that's also worth sort of thinking about as well, is that when you use the term best deck in the format, I think that's like, we're talking Star of the Show levels, we're talking Chain and Monarch levels. Like it's clearly just far and above with the strategy it has. It's so consistent, it's so powerful, it's a level above. And I think not every hero can have that in any given format, regardless. But in saying that, any hero can probably win any event with the right sort of approach and player and plan and bit of luck.
Oh, I'm gonna go on a tangent again just because this piqued my memory. But
go on, man.
I did say back in Tales we were doing the Arsenal Pass version of the Sunset Show of Tails, I did say that it's going to be it's ironic and funny that Tails will probably go down in history as the most diverse meta in Flesh and Blood history, and I think it was. Like in the context of Monarch, in the context of Everfest especially, like Tails was a great and diverse meta. Was there a huge representation of Briar? Yes. Was it the best deck in the format? Very debatable. And these tournaments are won by all kinds of different heroes. We had Viscerai wins, we had Briar wins, we had Prism, yeah, and I was even going to say Kano in Italy, Chain. Right? I think Kano won something.
Yeah, Ultim, Chain.
Yeah. God, it's just hilarious because that, I feel like, obviously people complain a lot in Everfest, but in Tails, people were really complaining because, it's a back-to-back Runeblade and Briar's Dominance, but I think that was probably like the healthiest meta in Flesh and Blood's history. Maybe Crucible, I don't know, it's hard to say, but probably Tails was the most diverse.
We'll see where we move from here, but yeah, I think so far you're spot on. Next question from KMason64 on Twitter. While speculation on mechanics and cards for Uprising might be too early, I'd like to frame it in terms of the metagame. What tools or archetypes for Ninja, Wizard, and Illusionist in Uprising would you be most excited to see, and what expansion of design could potentially be dangerous? So I've already had a little think about this, Brendan, so I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about this while I give my thoughts. But I want to start on that last point. What expansion of design could be potentially dangerous? Wizard is always precarious, I think, because of the nature of that class and the design and how arcane damage works, and especially how that kind of additional damage sort of function works in Wizard. I think there's always some danger with that design space, and I think that's something that LSS has to continue to balance. What tools and archetypes would I like to see? I think for Ninja, I would like to see this idea of something a bit darker from Ninja, right? Every time you play kind of Lord of Wind lines and these combos, it always feels so wholesome. It always feels like, Kadachi, this combo line, it feels, quite wholesome. You're being really fair. I would like to see something else a little bit unfair, a little bit dark and dirty, like you have with Chain and the Banished Zone. Be interested to see what Ash and Draconic and all these things do. I think that's something interesting to explore. Something less predictable with the play patterns and lines like you have with the current sort of Kadachi lines and Mask Momentum lines. That would be something I'd love to see. Maybe we see the new hit, the Pouncing Lynx, be really utilized because of the way that this potential new Ninja plays. And then from the Illusionist side, just not heralds and not auras. That's all I ask for, really. Is show me something else.
Then what is Illusionist if not heralds and auras, sir?
Oh, Enigma Chimeras and Phantasmifiers, and I'd like to see some ways to maybe mix it up. Maybe, yeah.
I get it. Hear me out on the Ninja thing. Okay, hybrid class, Ninja Runeblade, one class, and you get the dual wield Rosetta Thorns and just that'd be a pretty good class. I'd probably play that.
Yeah, what a troll. Yeah.
What a troll. So I think Illusionist is actually a pretty dangerous design space because that class is very, very good. It has a lot of tools. Like I said, I don't think it can be sort of a jack of all trades right now. I think the power creep has sort of forced it out of that role. But a few more tools and it's going to get there. And it got some serious tools in Everfest. I think that Illusionist is actually at risk, right? At risk for a bit more cards to get introduced to the card pool. I think the Illusionist could be dominant. And Ninja, we'll see, right? If we do get, if Ninja does get more on hit triggers that the opponent actually cares about, I could see Ninja being a very good class. And also Ninja needs more armor. I really believe in this sort of, I don't know, ideology that the fridge and armor has just become overwhelmingly important in Flesh and Blood, and heroes don't have to do ridiculous things to be competitive. So yeah, I would really like to see more armor for Ninja. And what was I'm trying to find the last one here. Oh, Wizard. Yeah, Wizard, of course. Anytime that if Kano is ever the best deck, Flesh and Blood won't feel like Flesh and Blood. Basically, it's just a different way of playing the game. So it's a dangerous design space. It is a bit, a lot of people don't have fun playing against Wizard for understandable reasons. So yeah, and then I don't know how Icelander will affect that equation, but we have. We have Ninja, we have Wizard with arcane damage that's effectively unblockable at certain thresholds. Now with a controlling factor as well that will sort of lock the opponent out of the game, freeze them. Could be the deck to play, to be honest, and make your opponents miserable.
Are we already getting a Brennan hard claim into Islander main?
It's basically my main, right? I'm going to play it at Nationals.
Sure. Okay, here we go. Prism and Islander. We have a couple of questions to run out. I've got one more sort of serious question, then a couple of last minute fun questions. But this question comes from Zachary. Zach, who's a ProQuest champion from Queensland up here in Australia, or down here in Australia rather. Hopefully I'll see you at the PT, Zach. What's going through your head when you're trying to shore up and improve a matchup through testing? Are you more often trying to make small tweaks and testing those changes before making more improvements? Or do you change many cards and attempt a radically different strategy? Do you have any tips for how to progress when a matchup just seems unbeatable? I think this might be my favorite question we've got for, not playing favorites, but I think this question is great here, Brendan, because this is something that's happening right now, in particular a lot with the testing. And what's going through your head when you're trying to shore up or improve a matchup through testing, Brendan?
Yeah, so it starts with the latter one you mentioned there, changing many cards, like radically different strategies for like the same hero. It's like, like with Chain, right? Let's say you're getting fatigued. There's two very radically different strategies that you can be like, hey, let's deck stack and try to craft an endgame here. Or let's just do as much damage as possible every single turn, and maybe that just overwhelms the opponent's ability to block on any given turn cycle, right? Two vastly different strategies, but both cut from the same cloth, I guess. And after that, once you pick one of those strategies, I think you do get into sort of the minutia of what cards you're going to be running, what toolbox cards you're going to be playing. And yeah, I mean, that's the way that I approach it. In terms of like helping an unwinnable matchup, it is usually... it's usually not a silver bullet in Flesh and Blood, unfortunately. It is actually kind of a complete reimagining of your game plan into that deck, right? And sometimes it is just the power of surprise, right? They sit down to play against an aggressive ninja, and you're control. And they've sideboarded completely incorrectly, all of their armor's incorrect, et cetera, So these kind of things are sort of the way that I approach that. Yep.
I think great response. I wanted to ask you first because I think mine kind of leads on from this, and I thought there'd be some great points, which they definitely are. This idea of like an unbeatable matchup. So I think there's this idea, like Brennan talked about, of like reimagining the game plan and going back to the drawing board. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be like gutting the whole deck. Changing a game plan drastically doesn't actually mean changing the deck drastically. It could actually be more of a fundamental way of playing the game as well. I think that's really important to understand and remember, is that you can often enact multiple different game plans with very similar shells of decks. So I think it's important to remember that. The one thing from my perspective is Brennan talked about changing many cards. I think my approach is a bit different. And I think Brennan probably vouch for this, is that I'll probably take it from more of a theory standpoint to start with, and just kind of go back to the drawing board like at a pure theory level before. I don't really play that many games, I would say, of like strategies necessarily. There's often times I'll think up strategies and then bin them before even playing a game because I just know theoretically and fundamentally they're not going to work. But I would say I'm more focused on like the pure theoretical and fundamental side of it, rather than playing the game out. Probably. It's
really important though, because before I ever start to go deep on a deck, the first thing I ask everybody for is give me all of your ratios, right? Like give me all of the ratios that you guys are operating and building this deck with, right? How many blues are you playing? How many yellows are you playing? How many reds are you playing? Let's say we're playing Chain, by the way. How many attacks are you playing? How many non-attacks? How many of those attacks are blood debt, in red, yellow, and blue? How many attacks are not blood debt in red, yellow, and blue? How many whiffs do you have? Like you playing cards that are based off that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just need the numbers. And it's like, then I can sort of start to get oriented on how I'm going to tweak this deck. Because if you're tweaking, the last thing you want to do is like, probably one of the biggest traps in Flesh and Blood is like, you got to try to make a deck more powerful. You start cutting blues, right? When the deck can't afford to have blues cut. You end up just having a much worse deck. So, and then we'll run the math on that too. Like you run the hype geom. And sort of see if it makes sense. The hype geom though can definitely be a trap as well. Like math is not the one source of truth. It's just a way to get your sort of initial thesis, and I think through testing and through feels where you find the art, right? You find the beauty of the actual powerful deck. Because I know with Prism, with Prism we got a little bamboozled by the hype geom, it turned out like siding down blues was just significantly better in some of these matchups. But that's how I approach it. No, definitely.
That's your view. I think if we were to point out two other weaknesses that one we each have, mine's definitely I rely too much on the numbers, too much on the science, and maybe Brendan's is too much on the art, and that's why we try and work together and pull somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I do get so. Honestly, my biggest weakness, and this does actually kind of go off this question, is that I just am not very good at building decks from zero. Like I think that anybody who says they're a deck tweaker and they're good at tweaking decks is just bad at deck building, full stop. Like deck tweakers may not exist. Like deck builders are deck tweakers. And this is coming from someone who tweaks decks. But like I need that it really helps to have that person in our group that's like constantly like reimagining the wheel, right? Constantly rebuilding the deck, getting the numbers, and just getting something functional. And yeah, I know for me that's super important as I go to try to increase the power level through minor tweaks and game plans and sideboards and things like that.
Yeah. No, makes sense. We have three last questions. They're all kind of fun questions. One's for both of us, and then one each. So, if you each had the power to ban one card, what would you ban? I mean, we just talked about Rosetta Thorn, right?
Is that the one you
wouldn't be bad? No. Do you know what? I think if I was to ban a card right now, I probably wouldn't, even though I'm not necessarily a big fan of how this format seems to be playing out. I don't think.
But you have to.
Card is going to.
You have to. Let's say you have to. You have to ban one.
So for this format specifically, if it's for this format,
no, just in general.
Oh, just for the health of the game long term.
Yeah.
Rosetta Thorn. Yeah, Rosetta Thorn.
I hear your Rosetta Thorn. I'll raise you a crown of seeds.
Yep, I think those are both. I was going to say if it's not that, it's probably a piece of legendary equipment, and it's probably going to be crown of seeds.
That card is powerful. I love it from a player standpoint, right? I love this idea where you can kind of like turbo through your deck and like always beat your opponent to second cycle, which is obviously not really the main use case of it right now. It's just its ridiculous value. But yeah, I mean, it's just a freaking amazing piece of equipment. And I think that it's gonna be, it's gonna sort of further shadow the game. Yeah, in the future, it'll have a long-term effect on the game.
Yeah. It's on my list of, I've talked about this before, I have this list of cards that I think will become a problem at some point. And I've had this, list since I basically started. I think Arcane Rising is when I started this list. And like Tome Fiendal was like one of those cards in that list when it first started. But Crown of Seeds, Rosetta Thorn, Winter's Wail, those cards are all on my list. Plunder Run was actually one of the first cards that went on the list. But yeah. Anyway, Brennan, question here for you. This is from the King of Pandas on Discord. In Magic, there is a term called jank. It's a nebulous term, but in short, it's a deck which is not optimal, but fun as hell for person piloting. Yeah, I think there's different things people might say about what makes something jank, but yep. In Flesh and Blood, I haven't necessarily seen a big number of jank decks besides some Moonwish Sunkiss decks. Well, you haven't seen Brendan's deck building decks from the beginning of the game. If you had to build a jank deck in Flesh and Blood, what would it be, and what would make it jank? Brendan, I want to give this question to you because I think
we built the jank deck in testing. So one of the I hope this deck is not better than we sort of found it out to be. But we built Cheerios Prism, utilizing like Veiled Intentions. I think that's what the card is called, and like Phantasmify. Yeah. By pitching the 0 cost, you're able to sort of always pay off the boots by paying the 1 cost on the non-tech action that pumps. And then, with Veiled Intentions, you actually draw a card and you just kind of recoup that action point. And then like, these lead to like very broken interactions with fractal replication, particularly on like Enlightened Strike and things like that. The deck seemed very powerful, just like consistency wasn't there, and I don't think that we could have sunk the resources in to make it good. But it's totally jank, right? Like you think Prism, you're thinking like auras or heralds, but like what I'm like Cheerios Prism, right? Let's play some non-attack actions in Prism. Let's increase our blowout as we get popped on Phantasmify.
I didn't have the pleasure of being involved with the deck building process on this one, but I did get to play a few games, and jank might be a reasonable term. Yeah. To be honest, I think there could be something there in the future. Is it for this format? I think probably not, but it was definitely fun to play. Okay, Brendan, I think that's kind of... Oh, there was one last question. As I said, question for you, question for me. MTG_RB on Twitter just asked, not fab related, but had heard in a previous episode that I had mentioned about dancing. Just wanted to know a bit more about that. I did rock and roll dancing for basically, I think, up until about 3 years ago, for most of my life. Just a really good outlet, I guess, for a bit of creativity and competition. And I actually got into it because of a production of Grease. So there you go, it's a bit more about it. But if you haven't seen rock and roll dancing before, you can go and look it up on YouTube. It's quite fast-paced, sort of two people dancing and doing aerial sort of acrobatics.
I feel like you have such an opportunity to answer that question with like the most ridiculous story, and then people just believe it. Like, I don't even know.
I mean, I have some ridiculous stories, but
I was a part of
for another time.
I was part of a traveling circus in Eastern Romania for a few years, and just go down the rabbit hole of Hayden's dancing career.
Definitely a niche culture, so there's some stories, but for another time. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions for this. We didn't get through all the questions, so we will circle back to some on Command and Cookout because basically every question was fantastic. Even some of these fun ones that we went through, they were great to do. And there's some other questions about future of metagames, future of the game, formats, evolution of metas, things like this. So we will come back around to some of those. Brendan, do we have a Google review this week, or are we straight through into wrapping it up? I know we've gone quite long.
We don't have a Google review. I do hope that Legend Story Studios, whether it's through my performance or just, they want to say, write something about whatever, I hope that they use that form that I submitted about myself, because my career section is pretty funny. Because we're talking about dancing, it makes me think about what I do for a job.
Right.
And we should probably let the listeners know, huh? Yeah. So I don't think we've talked about this on Arsenal Pass yet. Actually, so I work at a local college. Even though I kind of feel like I'm smarter than everybody there. Technically I'm a janitor, I guess. But I'm most of the time at night. Sometimes I'll see like half solved equations on the board, and I'll just solve them. It's funny actually. My nickname in high school, they said I was wicked smart, but I don't know. I hope that they post that, because I just feel like the people Flesh and Blood haven't gotten to get to know me like personally yet, and I just want to connect more.
The downfall of your Goodwill Hunting persona is
what are you doing?
People have seen that math maybe not your strong point.
Oh, don't tell anybody's listening. This is a secret. Don't tell anybody that is the that's a synopsis of Goodwill Hunting.
Keep the cards close to your chest or vest. Let us know if it's chest or vest. I've heard a debate about this before. Anyway, that's this week's pod. Mailbag episode for Arsenal Pass, episode 56. We're going to be at the PT next week. Come and see us, drop by, say hello, have a chat. On Sunday, definitely afternoon after the event. We'll be around for longer conversations. Obviously during the event we'll be playing, but we will be around. And as well, if you want to connect with us on Twitter, follow us on Twitter, engage in some of the absolute crap posting that we do. Brendan is at BrendanAPG. I'm at Fian_Dale. We talk all things Flesh and Blood, post-decklist, etc. We'll be updating, I'm sure, as we go through the PT. There'll be a few pictures, a few cute pics from the PT, no doubt. Otherwise, big thank you to all of our patrons, as always. And we'll see you next week, where we have, I think, a bit of a shorter episode. We're running into the PT, but we will be back next week before the PT. And we'll, of course, recap the PT the week after. So see you in New Jersey. Otherwise,
see
you
all then.